She was the perfect daughter, straight A's cheerleader, volunteered at the local hospital. Everyone in Orange County knew Sienna Hayes, the girl who had it all figured out. But on December 24th, 1997, behind the closed doors of a suburban home decorated with Christmas lights, perfection shattered into something unimaginable. What started as an argument over a Christmas present would end with a mother dead and a family destroyed. This is the story of how one teenage girl's obsession with control turned into an act so violent, so calculated, that it would shock an entire community. You're listening to The Justice Minute. December 24th, 1997. Orange County, California. It was supposed to be the perfect Christmas Eve. The Hayes family home sat on Maple Drive, a tree-lined street where neighbors knew each other by name. The house itself was picture-perfect: white picket fence, a two-car garage, and a front lawn decorated with inflatable snowmen and twinkling lights. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Victoria Hayes, 42, had spent the entire day preparing. She'd baked cookies, wrapped presents, and made sure every detail was exactly as it should be. She was a guidance counselor at Orange County High School, beloved by students and colleagues alike. Her husband, Robert Hayes, 45, was a successful accountant, and their daughter, Sienna Hayes, was 16 years old, the kind of teenager parents dream about. But perfection, as we often discover, is just a mask. Victoria Hayes was the kind of woman who had her life meticulously organized. She kept a leather-bound planner on her desk, color-coded by priority. Her office at Orange County High was decorated with motivational posters and photos of students she'd helped get into college. Colleagues described her as warm but firm, the kind of person who could make you feel heard and judged at the same time. She believed in structure, discipline, and doing things the right way. There was no room for shortcuts in Victoria's world, no room for disappointment, and certainly no room for her daughter to be anything less than perfect. Victoria had high expectations for Sienna, not just academically, though Sienna maintained a 3.9 GPA, but socially, morally, and behaviorally. Victoria wanted her daughter to be the kind of girl that other parents pointed to as an example, and for years, Sienna delivered. She was the girl who said, "Yes, Mom," and "No, Mom." She was the girl who came home by curfew. She was the girl who made her mother proud. But as Sienna entered her junior year of high school, something began to shift. Sienna Hayes was born into privilege. Her parents had money, stability, and a clear vision for her future. From the time she was young, Sienna understood the assignment: be perfect, stay perfect, remain perfect. She attended private school until 9th grade, took piano lessons, competed in youth soccer leagues, and was groomed for success. By all accounts, she was exactly what her mother had envisioned. But Sienna was also a teenager, and teenagers, by their very nature, begin to question the world around them. In 1997, Sienna was 16 years old. She had shoulder-length blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and the kind of beauty that made her stand out in any room. She was popular at Orange County High, not in the cruel, exclusionary way, but in the genuine way. People liked her, teachers praised her, boys wanted to date her, and yet, behind closed doors, Sienna was suffocating under the weight of her mother's expectations. Friends who knew Sienna during this time described her as increasingly withdrawn. She stopped talking about her future with the same enthusiasm. She became quieter at family dinners, and most tellingly, she began to rebel in small, almost imperceptible ways. She'd stay out 5 minutes past curfew. She'd wear makeup to school that she'd remove before coming home. She'd lie about where she was going on Friday nights. Nothing major, nothing that would raise serious red flags. But to Victoria, these small acts of independence were betrayals. The relationship between Victoria and Sienna had always been complicated. Victoria loved her daughter deeply. There's no question about that. But her love came with conditions. It came with expectations. It came with the implicit message that Sienna's worth was directly tied to her achievements and her obedience. As Sienna began to assert her independence, Victoria responded not with understanding, but with increased control. Victoria began monitoring Sienna's phone calls. She read her diary. She questioned her about her friends. She implemented a strict curfew and demanded to know where Sienna was at all times. She criticized her appearance, her grades, which were still excellent but not perfect enough, and her choice of friends. What Victoria saw as parental responsibility, Sienna experienced as suffocation. By December 1997, the tension in the Hayes household had reached a breaking point. Sienna was counting down the days until she could leave for college. Victoria was becoming increasingly anxious about losing control, and Robert, caught in the middle, tried to keep the peace by staying out of it. Then came the Christmas present. Sienna had asked for one thing for Christmas, a Sony Walkman. Not an expensive gift by any means, but in 1997, it was the height of teenage cool. A portable CD player meant freedom. It meant music. It meant a small piece of independence that Sienna desperately craved. She'd mentioned it casually to her father weeks earlier, and Robert had agreed it was a reasonable request. But Victoria had other ideas. She believed that Sienna didn't deserve a Walkman. Why? Because Sienna had been disrespectful, because she'd talked back, because she'd shown signs of independence that Victoria interpreted as ingratitude. Instead, Victoria decided to give Sienna a self-help book about gratitude and a gift certificate to a bookstore. It was, in Victoria's mind, exactly what Sienna needed. Robert disagreed. He thought Victoria was being too harsh. He wanted to give Sienna the Walkman. But Victoria was adamant. She was the primary parent, the one who set the rules, the one who understood what was best for their daughter, and she would not be swayed. On Christmas Eve, as the family sat around the tree, Sienna opened her presents. When she saw the self-help book and the bookstore gift certificate, something inside her broke. What happened next, according to police reports and witness statements, unfolded over the course of several hours. Sienna didn't explode immediately. Instead, she went to her room. She was quiet. She was withdrawn, and she was seething. Around mid-morning, Sienna came downstairs and confronted her mother. The argument started calmly enough, Sienna asking why she didn't get the Walkman, Victoria explaining that Sienna needed to learn gratitude. But as the conversation continued, it escalated. Sienna raised her voice. She said things she'd been holding back for months. She told her mother that she was controlling, that she was suffocating her, that she didn't trust her. Victoria responded by doubling down. She reminded Sienna of all the sacrifices she'd made. She told her that this was what happened when you were ungrateful. She told her that Sienna was being selfish and disrespectful. Robert tried to intervene, but Victoria shut him down. This was between her and Sienna. This was about discipline. This was about teaching her daughter a lesson. Sienna went back to her room. Victoria thought the matter was settled. She was wrong. What happened next is where the story takes a dark turn. Over the next few hours, Sienna made a decision that would change everything, a decision that even now psychologists and criminologists struggle to fully understand. At approximately 10:15 a.m. on December 24, 1997, Sienna went to the garage. She found a hammer, a standard claw hammer that her father used for household repairs. She held it in her hands for several minutes, according to later testimony. She thought about what she was about to do, and then she made her choice. Sienna walked back into the house. Victoria was in the kitchen preparing lunch. She didn't see her daughter coming. She didn't have time to react. Sienna raised the hammer and brought it down with force. Once, twice, 3 times. Victoria fell to the ground, blood pooling around her head. She was 42 years old. Robert heard the commotion from his office upstairs. He came running down to find his wife on the kitchen floor and his daughter standing over her, hammer still in hand. What happened next is unclear from the official reports, but Robert managed to disarm Sienna and call 911. He performed CPR on Victoria, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead at the scene. When police arrived at the Hayes home, they found a scene that contradicted everything they knew about the family. The perfect house, the perfect family, the perfect daughter. All of it was a lie. Sienna didn't run. She didn't try to hide. When police arrived, she was sitting in the living room, still in shock, still covered in her mother's blood. She confessed immediately. She told police exactly what she'd done and why she'd done it. She said her mother was controlling. She said she couldn't take it anymore. She said she wanted to be free. The arrest was swift. Sienna Hayes was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder. The case shocked Orange County. How could the perfect daughter commit such a heinous act? How could a 16-year-old girl kill her own mother? The community was divided. Some saw Sienna as a victim of an overbearing parent. Others saw her as a cold-blooded killer who had murdered her mother over a Christmas present. The media descended on the Hayes home like vultures. News vans lined Maple Drive. Reporters camped outside the police station. Everyone wanted to know, what could drive a teenage girl to commit such an act? In the interrogation room, Sienna was eerily calm. She answered every question directly. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't try to minimize her actions. Instead, she spoke about her mother with a detachment that chilled investigators. When asked why she killed her mother, Sienna said, "Because she wouldn't let me be myself. Because she controlled everything I did. Because I couldn't take it anymore." When asked if she felt remorse, Sienna paused. Then she said, "I feel sad that she's dead, but I don't feel sorry for what I did. She deserved it." Investigators were struck by Sienna's lack of emotional affect. She didn't cry. She didn't express panic or fear about her future. She simply stated facts. She had killed her mother. She had done it deliberately, and she didn't regret it. One detective later said in an interview, "I've interrogated murderers, rapists, and thieves, but I've never seen a teenager so calm about killing their own parent. It was like talking to someone who had just described a math problem, not a homicide." As investigators dug deeper into the Hayes family, a picture emerged that was far more complex than the initial headlines suggested. They found Victoria's diary, in which she documented her concerns about Sienna's rebellious phase. They found evidence of Victoria's controlling behavior, the monitoring of phone calls, the reading of Sienna's diary, the constant criticism. They found testimony from Sienna's friends about how strict her mother was, how suffocating the home environment had become. They also found something else, evidence that Sienna had been planning this for weeks. She had researched how to commit the crime. She had thought about the best way to do it. She had even written in her own diary about wanting her mother dead. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated murder. The prosecution would later argue that Sienna had calculated every detail. She knew her father would be upstairs. She knew her mother would be in the kitchen. She knew exactly what she was going to do and when she was going to do it. The only variable was the Christmas present. That was simply the trigger that set everything in motion. The trial of Sienna Hayes began in March 1998, just 3 months after Victoria's death. The courtroom was packed every single day. Reporters filled the gallery. Spectators lined up hours before the doors opened. Everyone wanted to see the perfect daughter who had become a killer. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Sienna Hayes had murdered her mother in cold blood. She had done it deliberately. She had done it with premeditation, and she had shown no remorse. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no question about whether she had done it. She had confessed. The only question was whether she would be tried as a juvenile or as an adult. The defense argued that Sienna was a victim of psychological abuse. They presented expert testimony about the effects of controlling parenting on adolescent development. They argued that Sienna had been pushed to the breaking point by a mother who refused to allow her any autonomy or independence. They painted a picture of a girl who had been suffocating under the weight of impossible expectations. But the prosecution countered that understanding Sienna's motivations didn't excuse her actions. Yes, Victoria had been controlling. Yes, the home environment had been restrictive, but that didn't give Sienna the right to murder her mother. Thousands of teenagers live with controlling parents. Thousands of teenagers feel suffocated by their families, but they don't kill their parents. Sienna Hayes had made a choice, and that choice was murder. The trial featured testimony from psychologists, criminologists, and family therapists. Each offered their own interpretation of what had driven Sienna to commit such an act. Dr. Margaret Chen, a forensic psychologist, testified that Sienna exhibited signs of what she called control-seeking behavior. According to Dr. Chen, Sienna had internalized her mother's need for control and had turned it outward. When she couldn't control her own life, she sought to control her environment by eliminating the source of her oppression, her mother. Another expert, Dr. James Morrison, testified that Sienna showed signs of what he called reactive aggression. He argued that the Christmas present incident had triggered a response that had been building for months. The aggression wasn't random or impulsive. It was a direct response to what Sienna perceived as a final act of maternal control. But the prosecution's expert, Dr. Richard Hoffman, testified that Sienna's actions indicated premeditation and calculation. He pointed to the evidence that she had researched how to commit the crime. He pointed to her diary entries expressing a desire for her mother to be dead. He argued that Sienna was not a victim of circumstance, but rather a calculating individual who had decided that murder was the solution to her problems. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 4 days. The question before them was not whether Sienna had killed her mother. That was established fact. The question was whether she would be tried as a juvenile or as an adult. If tried as a juvenile, she could be released at age 21. If tried as an adult, she faced a much longer sentence. On April 15, 1998, the jury returned with their verdict. Sienna Hayes would be tried as an adult. The courtroom erupted. Some people applauded. Others wept. Sienna herself remained expressionless. At sentencing, the judge had to decide what punishment fit the crime. The prosecution argued for life without parole. They argued that Sienna's lack of remorse, combined with the premeditated nature of the crime, made her a danger to society. They argued that she should never be released. The defense argued for a sentence that would allow for the possibility of parole. They argued that Sienna was still young, that she could change, that rehabilitation was possible. They argued that a life sentence was too harsh for a teenager, no matter what she had done. The judge sided with the prosecution. On May 3, 1998, Sienna Hayes was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, one for the murder of her mother and one for the attempted murder of her father, who had been injured during the struggle. She would not be eligible for parole for 50 years. She was 16 years old. The Hayes case became a watershed moment in discussions about parenting, control, and the psychology of adolescence. It raised difficult questions that society is still grappling with today. How much control is too much? At what point does parental guidance become psychological abuse? And what responsibility do parents bear when their children commit violent acts? Robert Hayes, Sienna's father, struggled with guilt for years after the trial. He had known that Victoria was controlling. He had known that the home environment was toxic, but he had done nothing to stop it. He had allowed his wife to dominate their daughter's life. And in the end, that inaction had contributed to his wife's death and his daughter's imprisonment. Robert eventually remarried and moved out of Orange County. He rarely speaks about the case publicly. When he does, he expresses regret about not intervening more forcefully in the family dynamics. He has said that he believes both his wife and his daughter were victims, Victoria of her own need for control, and Sienna of a mother who couldn't allow her to grow into her own person. As for Sienna, she remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Corona. She has spent the last 25 years in prison. She has earned her GED. She has participated in therapy. She has become a model prisoner, and yet she remains largely unrepentant about her crime. In interviews with prison psychologists, she has maintained that her mother's controlling behavior justified her actions. She has never fully accepted responsibility for what she did. The question of whether Sienna will ever be released remains open. She is eligible for parole consideration in 2048, when she will be 66 years old. Whether she will be granted parole at that time remains to be seen. But what is certain is that the Hayes case will continue to haunt Orange County for generations to come. The story of Sienna Hayes is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked parental control. It's a reminder that the relationships we build with our children have profound consequences, and it's a stark illustration of how quickly a perfect facade can crumble when the pressure becomes too great. What do you think? Was Sienna a victim of her mother's controlling behavior, or was she a cold-blooded killer who murdered her parent over a Christmas present? The answer, like so many things in true crime, is complicated. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, Do you think Sienna deserves the possibility of parole someday, or should she spend the rest of her life in prison? If you enjoyed this episode of the Justice Minute, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Justice is never as simple as it seems. Thanks for listening to the Justice Minute.